Changeworking, moving minds for change that lasts.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Changeworking, a show for practitioners and coaches who help their clients create change. My name is Ruckus, and as always, I'll be in conversation with James Tripp. Today, we're talking about mind shifts, those moments when something suddenly clicks and the world doesn't look the same for you anymore. And meta-awareness, the ability to witness your own internal processes so that you can recognize when those shifts are happening. This is super interesting to me. We explore those ideas of how that can show up in self-work, but also how it can unfold in client sessions. So hope you enjoy this conversation on mind shifts and meta-awareness. Well, I'm wondering about that because we recently had the podcast about parts work, which is about to come out. It'll probably be out by the time this is out. And I'm curious about, just to dig in more on that, the difference as you see it between a part being fully in control and you feel like that is you, versus what you'll say sometimes, I'm in a certain trance. Do you see that as the same thing or two different things?
I see them as the same thing. So there's a line from a Stephen Walensky book, which I probably mentioned in the podcast before, which was like a koan for me. And so he didn't really explain what it meant, but it stuck with me. And I really kind of meditated upon it, quote unquote, for many years, which is all trance is identity. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's about, when a trance comes alive, whatever we're in, it's exactly the same thing we're talking about. The reality that we're in, everything else goes away. We have amnesia for everything else. It's all gone. That becomes, in a sense, the totality of who we are in the moment. Hence, all trance is identity, or when a part becomes executive, i.e. lights up and pulls our consciousness into it, everything else goes away. We have amnesia for everything else, and we fall into the trance of what I see is all there is and how I see it is how it is. So yeah, that's what goes on for me. There's a flip side to this as well. So I sometimes say now all trance is identity and all identity is trance. Mm-hmm. Meaning the flip side of it is we've usually got a story of self, which we may be connecting to explicitly, but mostly we're connecting to implicitly. It's under the surface. So a kind of identity, if you like, a set of concepts that we use to make up our map of self. And when we're coming from that's a big shaper of the trances of our lives. So in a sense, all identity is trance as well. So be careful what you say you are. Be careful what you're identifying with. Is it serving you? Is it limiting you? This kind of thing. So there's two sides to that. All trance is identity and all identity is trance. But it is definitely the case that when a part becomes executive or lights up or whatever, we're in the trance of it. And that's it. That's everything. It's another reason I like the metaphor of reality tunnels, because when we're in a tunnel, everything outside of the tunnel we can't see.
Well, how do you think about it because I've done so much parts work, like now I can identify when a part is in the executive, quote unquote, or is all, and I can very easily now pull back and I can experience, there's actually 3 parts here and none of them, now I can interact with them. And how do you think about that or talk about that?
So to me, this is a part of developing a sort of set of meta skills. Mm-hmm. Or a sort of meta self. It's a part that can be apart from everything else and take a view on it. Or I often say that people are very poor witnesses to their own processes by default.
Right.
When you start becoming a better witness to your own process, it's like you start developing a part of you that can stand apart from and witness those processes. Now, if you look at various approaches to therapy, there are some approaches to therapy like metacognitive therapy that are all about this. They're all about developing, thinking about thinking, beliefs about beliefs, but also this ability to witness what's going on within your own kind of process. And in a sense, to me, this is something that I got a lot of from NLP when I originally trained in NLP, becoming a better witness to my own processes. And interestingly enough, NLP, before it was called neuro-linguistic programming, was called meta. And it was very interested in process, very interested in what's actually happening. That was its main interest. So developing that skill to kind of witness your own processes, relate to them, and not just be had by them, to me, that's an incredibly valuable skill. Some approaches to therapy will absolutely focus on that in one way or another. Like, for example, metacognitive therapy, to a certain degree, something like acceptance and commitment therapy, as well, and something like 3 principles, which is interested in the nature of thought and being able to be apart from your thought and relate to it differently. These are all approaches that essentially coach people in what you could call meta skills meta to our own processes, our own thinking, our own emoting, this kind of thing. In a lot of ways, Erickson, actually, you could make a case that a lot of Erickson's work is sort of meta in that sense. But he would do it in a very interesting way because he wasn't trying to get people to be consciously meta, but unconsciously meta. Right? So a lot of his stuff was about what you are learning from these experiences you're having. So he's inviting people to witness, but he's always inviting their unconscious mind to witness. Right? Which is a very interesting thing. A lot of people miss that about Erickson's work. So it is quite an up above it and apart from it approach. What Erickson didn't do was what I call diving into the matrix, right? That's where we go, right? Let's just, someone could do parts work with you and you not have much meta consciousness to the process, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So if you're doing parts work and you're being facilitated through it, I would call that, and you have no meta consciousness to the process. You're down in it. You're very much, in what's going on. And you can do a lot of stuff like memory reconsolidation work, a lot of the clean language stuff I do. To me, that's kind of down in it. I call it entering the matrix. And you can reweave people's conceptions of reality and stuff at that level. But what you will find is that people that develop more of a meta self as well, they can do that work and do it better.
Okay.
Right? Because they have more maneuverability. And this is why sometimes if you do regression work, for example, with somebody who hasn't developed that much resource beyond what they had at the time that the part was formed, you don't have as much to work with. Right? Also, with regard to stuff like PTSD, there's something that Ronald Rudens wrote in his book. I think it's called When the Past is Always Present. This was a book that influenced me some years ago. He was talking about trauma, what people call trauma, and saying that some people seem to have a resilient landscape, he used the term, and some people seem to have a vulnerable landscape, psychological landscape he's talking about. So an event that would be traumatic for one person who perhaps has a vulnerable landscape psychologically is not necessarily traumatic for another person who has a resilient landscape. But what Ronald Rudens doesn't talk about is, well, what's the difference that makes the difference? What does a vulnerable landscape versus a resilient landscape consist in? Now, my belief is the landscape consists in your kind of habitual ways of thinking, your underlying belief sets, these kinds of things. So often working on a kind of higher level to repattern your skills, your relationship to yourself, what you believe about your own beliefs, your cognitions about your own cognitions, creates a lot more adaptiveness and resilience that actually insulates against further trauma, quote unquote, in the future, but also puts capacities and tools and resources at one's hands that help a person reconsolidate old memories and transcend that. So people that have good meta skills tend to do the down in it work better. I guess that's what I'm saying. If you've got more up above it skills, you can do the more down in it work a lot better and a lot more effectively. So I think there's a good case to be made for developing those kind of higher level skills. And some therapies by default start to do that. So your experience in internal family systems, you have noted that you've become a better witness to your own processes by default, even though that's not the intention of that therapeutic modality. It's a side effect of it for you.
Right. So I was literally, before you went into all that, I was going to ask, am I less effective because I'm always thinking about change work? But you said it's literally the opposite of that.
One of the reasons, I suspect that you have become a better witness to your own processes as a result is because you have an interest in the work and an interest in what's going on.
Right.
Now, not everybody that comes to therapy is interested in the work or interested in their own processes. Some people are just desperate. They just want a solution. They just want a change. And they're not even remotely interested in their own cognitive processes, psychological processes, emotive processes. That's like, it's boring to them. They just want this thing fixed, right? Now, those those clients, by the way, you have a lot less to work with as a practitioner with those clients. I'm not saying you can't get change, but you have a lot less to work with. The clients who are legitimately interested in their own processes or are interested in the paradigm that you're working through, because for you with internal family systems, you're interested in the paradigm of internal family systems, right?
Right.
You have interest about it. Interest is level 1. Curiosity is level 2. That's one up from interest. So like interest is a highly valuable resource and asset when you're doing change work on behalf of the client. If the client's interested in the work, if they're curious, that's an even more powerful resource. So again, mentioning Erickson again, Erickson was always looking to evoke curiosity, to encourage curiosity.
And you said earlier he was trying to get clients to have a meta-awareness, but unconsciously.
I think so. I think a case could be made for that. When I read a lot of Erickson's case studies, because Erickson was never transparent and like, here's what I believe and here's what I do. He would do everything cryptically. So you have to kind of read a lot of Erickson and read a lot of case studies to go, what's actually going on here? What are the recurring themes? To me, Erickson is largely an educator, number one. He's not a reprogrammer. He's not like trying to get in and reconsolidate memories or anything particular like that. He will do that from time to time. Somebody might mention the February Man case study. So it's not that he never did that kind of thing, but he's never thinking, what's this problem that I need to solve? What's this person's problem? He's thinking, what does this person need to learn? He's always thinking in terms of learning. So a lot of what he's getting people to learn, if you look at how he works with pain, he just starts to manipulate the features of it, what NLP would later come to call submodalities, perhaps, and have people unconsciously learn that something can change, right? That so often Erickson would have people turn up their symptoms. Why? Because they would unconsciously witness, oh, I have some power to influence this thing that I thought that I didn't have a power to influence. Also, as he's drawing their attention to it, they are now apart from it by default. So a lot of Erickson's stuff is simply doing stuff for the unconscious mind to learn from. But what it's learning more about is what's possible in terms of someone's personal process.
So because I've definitely done that where, someone they're feeling something and we get it on a scale of 1 to 10, and then you ask them to turn it up 1.
Yeah.
But then I would say, we did that so that now you have control over it. And that usually is like, oh.
Right.
But so you're saying Erickson wouldn't explain it. He would just do that.
He never tipped the trick for the conscious mind. Right. He would always be suggesting that the unconscious mind is learning something valuable from this. But he was very against explicitly tipping the trick. And I think part of the reason for that is because if you're working with people who are not inherently interested in the process, they can have a tendency to dig in to their current reality whenever they find it challenged explicitly. Right? So this is what Dave Ellman would have called the critical faculty. So Erickson and Ellman were not friends by not any means, but Erickson was still doing a lot of what he was doing, a lot of his conscious, unconscious double binds and stuff, for me, are about depotentiating the critical faculty or making everything so smoke-like that the critical faculty can't get its teeth into it and argue against it. But I do think that if you separate consciousness from awareness, that's a useful thing, because we can be conscious and aware of what we are. We can be conscious of what we're aware of, but we can be aware of things that we are not conscious that we are aware of. Right? For example, when you drive a car, you are aware, but you're not consciously tracking everything you need to track. You're unconsciously tracking most of what you need to track.
Right.
But you're still aware of it unconsciously. Or hopefully you are, otherwise you're probably a lousy driver. So Erickson was kind of working on that level. He wanted people to witness their own processes and learn unconsciously from that witnessing.
So how do you personally approach and feel about those types of things? Do you like to encourage and educate the client that they can witness their own process? How do you approach it?
Well, it's not easy for me to answer. Or if I'm going to answer this really, truly honestly, it depends on what week you ask me. because I will flux and flow in and out, and I do not think that this is a bad thing at all. So sometimes I'm working very much in a down in it kind of way. I'm going through that sort of phase, and I might be relying a lot on unconscious witnessing or encouraging a lot of unconscious witnessing. I'm always encouraging at least unconscious witnessing. So witnessing for me is a really important thing. And this is in some of the materials we've been unpacking in client shifts and will be unpacking in client shifts more, is this idea of attention as a faculty for change, right? Awareness, attention, whether it's conscious or unconscious attention, that bringing awareness or attention back onto the processes that are underlying awareness and attention in one way or another is a phenomenally generative thing. So I'm always working with that, whether it be conscious or unconscious, but sometimes I'm working in a more explicit sort of way, which is more of a coaching approach. I might want to intentionally coach people on their own skills with their own processes, which I might call mind coaching or mind skills coaching, something like that. I can never think of a good thing to call it. But other times it might be a more kind of down in it change work approach, where the learning isn't so explicitly laid out. There isn't like such a clear framework or such a clear structure laid out. Now, depending partly on maybe my mood, my current interests, I might do it one way or another, but also it's going to depend somewhat on clients as well.
So when you have a client and you said, okay, so let's start there's I'm going to go backwards, curiosity and then interest. And then what would you call the version where they just want a solution?
I call it desperation sometimes. It might be unfair, but it's just like, look, I'm not interested in anything. I just need this problem gone. Help me. Right.
And do they literally say that, or is it that just you kind of get that you unpack that from what
that's sort of my caricature of the attitude. But
yeah.
You'll get people come in, I've got a client I'm working with at the moment who's just depressed. They say, they're depressed. They don't want to get out of bed. They're in a hole. That's one of their metaphors. But they don't really have much interest in what's going on or what's creating that depression, or even apparently in any frameworks for getting out. They just seem to want to ruminate in the loop of, I'm depressed, everything is wrong, I shouldn't be this way. Right. So it's just like, there's a low level, and this is part of depression. One of the problems with depression as an issue is people who are depressed are not usually interested in much. So that quality, the asset of interest or curiosity is often hugely damped down or suppressed. And who knows what comes first? Maybe it's the lack of interest and curiosity that actually contributes to the depression, or maybe it's a result of the depression, or maybe there's a strange loop at play, a downward spiral.
If you have a client that comes in that's at that desperation level, that has no interest or curiosity, definitely no curiosity if they don't even have interest, do you decide, is it per client, whether it is useful to try to engender a little interest and that's helpful, or do you just go for the solution because that's where they're at in the moment?
I tend to go for the solution, but I'm still going to be working with that Ericksonian tilt that learning is going on. So I'm going to hint at learning and this kind of thing. I will also do my best to engender curiosity particularly when I get hypnotic, and I'll often work with such clients in a conversational hypnosis kind of a way, because if they've got really no particular interest or curiosity about the process, they can often not even have time to want to do some formal work, or they don't want to give that much energy to it because they haven't really got the buy-in for it or something like that. I'll tend to work in a more conversational hypnosis way. And I'll sort of tend to enter the flow of their stuff. This isn't always wise, because sometimes if they're really rigidly stuck in their story and their trances, just trying to enter the flow of their trances and weave things in, they can be really resilient in keeping things out. So sometimes there's a little bit more shaking up to be done. I was working with somebody recently who was really shutting out everything I was saying. I had to get quite provocative and make some pretty big moves that shook things up and were bordering on probably insulting and offensive points. But like sometimes that's what needs to happen to shatter the trance that you're in. I do a little bit of provocative work sometimes. So it's going to depend on the client. In an ideal world, I will say this, I I had a client a little while ago. He said, I warn you, I'm a tough nut to crack. And I said, well, that's interesting. And I said, fortunately, I've got some pretty good nut cracking tools. But wouldn't it just be easier, given the outcome that you want, if you just decided you were going to open the shell? Right. And by the way, as an aside, that to me is an example of conversational hypnosis. I've just taken his metaphor and I've done something strategic and tactical with it to shift him into a different perspective or mindset. But the reason that client comes up is because some people love the challenge of cracking the tough nut. You know, that's all part of the love of the art for them. They love that. I have a fascination with tools and strategies for cracking tough nuts. But that doesn't mean that I want to spend all my time cracking tough nuts. I actually just want to help people in the easiest way possible. And I want to enjoy the work as well, because I'm selfish like that. You know? When I look at different clients, there are clients that I can help and I can work with and I can crack them and they're tough nuts. And I'm not going to say there isn't a modicum of satisfaction if a tough nut who's been really tough does get cracked, but it doesn't mean I enjoy the initial labor of cracking the tough nut. For myself, and this is just owning my biases and my proclivities, I enjoy working with the people who have an interest and a curiosity. Those are the people I love to work with the most. It's enjoyable for me to work with them from beginning to end of the process. You know, I feel like we're climbing the mountain together rather than I'm climbing the mountain and they're dangling off the rope as a dead weight on me or something like that. You know, I'll admit that, you know, and I think that's a human thing. And a lot of people don't necessarily admit to being humans. We're all humans. So people go, yeah, I love working with clients. All clients equally? Really? You know, yeah, I do. I love it. They feel they have to say that. The truth is for me is I love working with some clients and other clients are hard work. You know, and they might be hard work. And, you know, should the nut get cracked, I might go, and have a sense of satisfaction from it. So there's variables in the mix.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I want to bring it back to that example I gave earlier of, with me, specifically with that I would get obsessed with something I wanted to buy. And I was like, could not stop thinking about it until I got it. So let's pretend that I love doing these thought experiments. Let's pretend that I was at that desperation level as the client.
Yeah.
And I got the shift that I did because right now, like I said, right before this call, I tried to make myself find that feeling of needing to buy something. I still couldn't do it. So pretend that I don't know anything about change work. But I did get that shift. How would you explain to me, as someone who doesn't understand anything about change work, what happened?
Right. You know, the first thing I'll say is that it would be a conversation rather than an explanation.
I see. Yeah.
Right. So it would depend, you know, I would start off and then it would unfold. But the thing that I would say is the reason you're experiencing things differently is because you had a shift in how you were seeing things at a deeper level, the deeper sense that you were making of things. I might say, you know, we're all organized in a certain way by default, and we're going to show up and engage with the world through those default organizations. And they largely remain stable until we go into the system and reorganize things, you know, create different associations. And when we do that, what we get is a shift in experience. And that is always true for all human beings because that's how we work. So I might say something along those lines, and it's going to be a conversation. You'll note that everything I say there, if you go back and examine it, there's nothing overly specific in it, right?
Yeah.
But all of it's quite evocative. And to me, that's a mark of hypnotic languaging, is you want to speak in a way that evokes and creates a sense of, yes, that makes sense, without it having to convey any information or make any logical sense whatsoever.
Yeah. I was just going to say that was gold right there. I know a lot of practitioners are going to rewind that and listen to that again, because I had myself in the mind of a client who didn't understand. And it was, without being specific, it did make me feel as though I started to understand how change could happen.
Right. Because what you want to do, and this is an important part of framing in all change work, as far as I'm concerned, is people need a rationale that makes, it doesn't have to make sense. They don't have to understand it deeply. It just has to tick the box of going, oh, there's a reason. It's almost like, if you heard of the famous photocopier experiment. So there was an experiment done on influence where they would have someone who wanted to cut in on a line. This is back in the 90s when people needed photocopiers and stuff more. Like a university or a college, there was a line for the photocopier, and they wanted to get people to cut into the line, cut in and jump at the front of the line. And what they did is one approach was to just go up and say, "Do you mind if I cut in ahead of you?" And mostly people would get a, "Yes, I do mind. Go to the back of the line." But then when people said, "Oh, do you mind if I cut in ahead of you because I really need to make this copy?" then their success rate would go up massively, but there's no actual additional information there.
Right.
So like this idea that we make decisions based upon information is completely biased. It's completely bogus, not biased. So that extra because is this idea of the because. And this is why in the Hypnosis Without Trance book, I talk about the big because. You want to come up with a because where people go, "Oh, that makes, yeah. Even if it doesn't, even if they stop and go, "Hang on, what did he say?" That's not what you want. What you want is that, "Oh, right, I can relax now. I can let my critical faculty drop because it's like, yeah, that made sense. What he said made sense. What did he say? I don't know, but it made sense." That's the important bit. So again, this is a marker for me of what constitutes hypnotic language and communication. It's not about information conveyed. It's about the shift that gets evoked. It's about the shift in state, the shift in attitude, the shift in engagement. That's what you're looking for all hypnotic communication, regardless of whether it's formal hypnosis, conversational hypnosis, or regardless of whether you even call it hypnosis. You could call it just influential communication.
Yeah. I don't think I have a question here. I can't stop thinking about, because this happened recently, the moment when that shift happened and I felt it, I'm just like obsessed with when that happens. I don't know. It's just amazing to me. It doesn't matter how many times it's happened to me. Every time it's amazing and it's exciting. And I can't get enough of that.
So this is what my old mentor, Steve Chandler, would call a mind shift.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, Steve's frame on this, a mind shift, really changed how I did change work. Steve was a coach, not a change work guy. But the aim of the game for him was to evoke mind shifts in people. And it's that moment where suddenly you're seeing something differently.
Mm-hmm.
The old way is gone and there's a new way in its place. So I think about this a lot when I'm doing change work. I'm looking for those mind shift moments. I'm looking to evoke mind shifts in the moment. And anyone who's NLP trained will know in NLP, you do a lot of training of sensory acuity and calibrating states so you can see when they shift and things like this. So I'm looking for mind shifts in the session. And if I see what looks like a mind shift, because you can usually see it.
Right.
Because when somebody's mind shifts like that, they do not keep the same expression and keep suddenly there'll be something like they'll go, right, something will tip that a mind shift has just happened. So if I'm working with a client and I see a mind shift, I do not plow on ahead, right? I'm going to go, "So what just happened?" Right? Or I'll go, "There you go." Or something like that. I'll mark it again. And this is the point, and we've talked about this in Client Shifts Academy. This is the point about creating a difference engine, getting that ember of change and then blowing on it, allowing that moment to become even more by spotlighting, putting it under the spotlight of consciousness and adding a little more attention and energy and significance to it. But it's that key idea of the mind shift. And to me, I'll just say this, because Banner and Grinder, who I'm sure most people know, who are the sort of creators of NLP or co-founders of NLP, they always used to say insight is nonsense. Because old school therapy was based on this idea of insight, right? Now, the reason they were dismissing insight, I think, is because Freud had this idea that insight was key to driving change. But what insight meant to Freud is you accepted his explanation and framework. Right? That was what it meant.
Right.
It was nothing personal, nothing like a personal reconnection of something or a shift in seeing. It was just like, now you understand. Excellent. And that doesn't really change anything. Yielding to somebody else's framework is not true insight. So a lot of NLPers will say insight doesn't drive change. I would say insight absolutely does, or a shift insight does. It's absolutely key. So I'm mentioning that because if you think of insight, it's not necessarily insight, it's a shift in sight. It's that mind shift, a shift in seeing and a shift in being. That's what we're always looking to get. And sometimes it's as simple as saying, have you thought about it like this? And then offering a different frame. Sometimes it's that simple.
Right.
Sometimes it can be a throwaway line that gets that shift for the client that you didn't expect would have the same kind of impact that it did get.
Yeah, the insight or a mind shift is the difference between, even on Instagram, you'll see little platitudes or little, sayings. And okay, I can intellectually understand why that would be a great way to live my life, but that doesn't mean anything to me right now.
Yeah.
And then I could have that exact same insight and mind shift in a session, and now I really believe it to my core.
Yeah.
But those are two different things, like intellectually understanding versus actually knowing and feeling it.
And I think there's timing and, one thing, the same thing a moment later might not have landed. It wouldn't have landed on the same set of neuronal activity or whatever. Lexi was just saying this morning that she was out yesterday just getting something in the store, and somebody had said to someone else, "Oh, how are you? How's it going?" or something like that. And the guy turned around, he said, "Well, every moment of life is a blessing." And she said, it's like not an original thing. It's not like something that you wouldn't have read on a Facebook post or a meme or something like that. But she said just in that moment, it had really struck her. Something about his attitude, his energy, the way he was showing up, and that, every moment of life is a blessing. And she said like that's kind of changed her outlook since that moment yesterday. She's been feeling better, feeling different. Now it could have been, we don't know all the variables in the mix there. We don't know all the unknown interdependencies. Maybe there was a particular bit of light that glinted off something at the right moment. Who knows what came together in that moment? Because like she said, it's not like, oh, I've never heard something like that before. It's like I've heard that 1,000 times.
Right.
But, well, like I mentioned, the point about captures your imagination, right? I love the phrase captures your imagination. The reason I love that is because I was having a conversation with my friend Freddie Jacquin, who some people will know. He's also a hypnotist. And I can't even remember what the conversation was about. I have no clue. But he just said, well, it's whatever captures your imagination. And in that moment, I was just like, captures your imagination. So I saw that phrase in a different way. I felt it in a different way. I was opened up by it in a different way. Or do you know the story of Sydney Banks, founder of the Three Principles?
Mm-mm.
So Sydney Banks, he was a Scottish welder with no like formal education, who was living in Canada, worked in a paper mill. This is back in the 70s. Not a reader, not a philosopher, like an anxious, uptight guy by all accounts. And his wife had dragged him along to a couples counseling retreat. He just didn't want to go. He's just negative about it all. And he went out to have a cigarette with one of the other course participants. And this course participant was talking about his insecurities and said, I'm just really insecure that my wife's going to be doing this. I'm insecure about that. And Sydney Banks said to the guy, he said, I know what you mean. I'm really insecure as well. And the guy just laughed at him and said, Sid, you're not insecure. You just think you are. And it was a throwaway line, but like the heavens parted and he had a hallelujah moment. What if everything that I think, that everything I feel, everything I believe is just because I think it is this case? He suddenly saw his thought and his thinking in a different way. And for him, it was absolutely like an immediate change, immediate transformation. And the reason that the Three Principles kind of took off, or so the story goes, is because people that knew Sid Banks were going, what's happened to you? He had such a shift in his character and his ground of being, became someone who was stressed out to someone who was just completely relaxed and serene and hanging out in his well-being perpetually. And he started doing his best to articulate how he now saw the world differently from how it was before. And slowly the people hanging around with Sid started getting this shift as well, and then further and further out. So to this day, Three Principles is based on having a conversation that helps you wake up to the nature of your thought and to recognize that your well-being is innate and doesn't have to be achieved through anything. As you might say, you cannot you cannot think and analyze your way to well-being. You can only free yourself from the thinking and analysis that's been keeping you from it. So there's a kind of whole paradigm there. But it all came from a moment, a mind shift. What could have been a throwaway line.
I think that's what I'm getting to. Is I'm just so interested and obsessed with everything that had to happen for that mind shift to happen in that moment. And any one small variable was different. It might not have happened.
Right. But this is exactly why I've got this bias against pro forma techniques.
Yes.
Right? Because you just don't know. I used to run pro forma techniques, and like sometimes, nothing would happen. Sometimes a lot would happen. But I'd often check back with the client and go, so what made it different? It's when you said this thing. That thing I said, not the process that we did.
Right.
But it might be that I need to do the process and say the thing, and the sun needed to be glinting on the picture frame in a certain way. And, what are all the unknown variables? And this is the thing about complex systems. People often say to me, James, what do you mean by complexity? I say it's a property of any system that consists in, at least in part, in unknown and unknowable interdependencies. Right? So what needs to happen for that mind shift is going to be the product of an emergent moment that has underneath of it unknown and unknowable interdependencies. So basically, you don't get to know, right? You don't get to know the full thing. You can start to go, you can get some pattern recognition for what kind of characteristics tend to lean things towards mind shifts. How do we stack the odds of getting a mind shift? But what we can never do is control a mind shift. And this is the thing. I remember an occasion on a plane, and we were going down the runway. When it suddenly accelerates and it goes super fast? Mm-hmm. I don't have any fear of flying generally as a rule. I'm just zen-like on planes. But we're just at that point accelerated, there was this huge clunking sound on the plane. The plane kind of lurched a bit. And my brain obviously concocted some kind of notion that death was imminent. And I had a sudden surge of fear. And the thing that was distressing for me in the moment is that my daughters were at different points on the plane. So I had this lurch of fear. Now, we were talking earlier about like a meta skills, meta awareness, because I was able to witness that and not just be had by it. I was like, oh, there you go. Right? So I'm instantly in a witnessing point. And I asked myself the question, which is a mind-shifting question, what is everything that I am that goes beyond this sensation right now? And I asked myself that question in order to change my relationship with what was going on. And that idea of like everything else goes away, I want to include more. So what is everything I am that goes beyond this experience right now? And a sense came to me and I had a shift. But in my kind of felt sense set, it caught me suddenly in that moment that I was still assuming I was a person. Mm-hmm. Right? Whatever else it was that went beyond that, my personhood was a given. So I asked myself the further question. This is all within the space of about probably 5 seconds. I asked myself the further question, what is everything I am that goes beyond the idea of personhood? And in that moment, it was like a massive, I can't put this into words. It's not possible to put into words. But it was like I just got blown wide open into everything. So I probably had what people would call a no-self experience, like a really profound one that one might expect to be induced by psychedelics or something like that. Mm-hmm. But it was just like, boom, whoa. I was one with everything, to quote the punchline from that joke about the Dalai Lama ordering pizza. And it was incredible. It was just incredible sense, incredible sensation, incredible feeling. Wow. You can bet I tried to replicate that. So if it was just a product of those questions I asked myself, well, I should be able to ask them again.
Right.
And get the same effect. But I couldn't. And the memory that I can get of it right now is nice and it's good and I can connect to some of the sense or the feeling of it. But that was like an ephemeral moment and there was a coming together of everything in that moment, maybe the adrenaline, maybe the thoughts about my family, maybe who knows what it was. But, I can't replicate that moment. And nobody can replicate any moment of change work reliably with client after client after client. I've no doubt there's someone, at least, or some people listening to this going, yes, I do it all the time. I don't doubt there are people that would say that. I can only speak from my own experience and view, but that's how it appears to me.
Yeah. I was thinking about when you're saying when you see a shift or calibrate the mind shift happening for the client and how you mark it out. And I was just thinking, I must be a great client because I say something big just happened. Like I mark it out for myself as a client. And she's like, okay. And then I just say, we need to slow down and settle back because I really want to dig into it.
Yeah. Well, that's probably because there's more value to be had from this moment, this mind shift.
Right.
So you're sort of policing the boundaries of it to a certain degree, right? Let's just not move on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is good. I think this is the one thing about when clients get a bit more experience, particularly those who have the interest in the process, have curiosity about the process. They start to develop their own skills for self-facilitation, for discernment inside of the process, which serves, that's part of the co-creative flow. So a good practitioner will utilize that, in my view. But also there's something generative because it becomes not just about whatever you were working on in the session. You are cultivating these kind of meta-level skills that start to unfold in other times and other places in your life. They become available to you in your everyday life more and more. So it's a kind of like an internal skills training thing, but that only generally happens when people have, that's not true, but it happens more when people have an active interest or an active curiosity. Sometimes it happens by default with other people as well to a certain degree.
So there you go. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I really love this idea of being a witness to your own process. And it's something that I work on with myself all the time. And the questions it brings up as a change worker are how can you help your clients notice when a shift has happened for them? And what are some ways that you can help them develop meta-awareness without explicitly teaching it? You can reach us at changeworkingpod@gmail.com. If you have thoughts or ideas for topics, or if you have any questions, we'll try to answer those on a future episode. See you next time.
Changeworking is produced by Ruckus Sky. For information on training, go to clientshifts.com.